Good morning. Thank you very much, Lydia and Megan, for the introduction. I'm John Simpson. I identify as male. I am tall. I'm over 6 feet, although we're all the same today in our tiny little rectangles. I've got graying brown hair. I've got a stubble beard that I've been working on for a while. Today I'm wearing a black t-shirt and a blue blazer. I'm an English speaker. And my French is not very good, but I'm taking French classes. And this is a point of pride for me because my mother's a French teacher and I'm working really hard on it. So thank you very much for that. I also would like to acknowledge the land that I am on. This is Treaty 6 territory. I'm coming to you today from Edmonton. This is a traditional gathering place for many Indigenous peoples. That includes Cree, Blackfoot, Inuit, and Métis. This is something of which I'm newcomer to Edmonton, still relatively, although I've been here 10 years, but I'm coming to understand this. I'm ignorant of this space, and it's something that I'm working on both with myself and my family, and also with the scout group that I have the privilege to lead once a week. So I'm coming and getting better. And I would like to, just last thing before we begin, I'd like to say thank you. First, I'd like to say thank you to a group. That's the Humanities Social Sciences National Support Team. First, for your past work that you've done that we have moved forward together, and also for the work that you're continuing to do today. I also want to thank you for thinking that somehow I would be an appropriate keynote. I'm not sure that's the case. I'll try to prove you right today, but we'll see. And a special thank you to Pierre-Luc and Diane for handling the translation with the slides. So thank you very much for that. So without further ado, let us begin. So I have two thens. The first then is then the past, and then we will move and we will look at then the future, a small, idiosyncrasy of English that we can play on here. So we'll take it while we can. So I tried to imagine some questions that might be interesting, as much as they can be. I don't want to tell you old person stories for a long time here. So where have we come from? How do we get here? What do things look like? And then I want to turn those into lessons for the future. So that's what we'll do. So where did this idea come from? How do we end up with the Humanities Social Sciences National Support Team? And I apologize up front to the historians. I see some names in the attendance list. I'm not a historian, so I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not 100% sure. I didn't do quite as much digging as you might have done, but it seems pretty clear that somewhere around 2013, there started to be conversations, and there started to be conversations between individuals who are related to organizations. Those organizations are on your screen. We had Compute Canada, or Calcul Canada, an organization called INC or INCI, also closely related to DHSI, the Digital Humanities Summer Institute, and well as Canadian Society for Digital Humanities, or Société Canadienne de Humanité Numérique. And the people involved in this are, it's my understanding, Dugan O'Neill, Susan Brown, Ray Siemens, and Michael Sinatra to some degree. And they're interested in figuring out how something more can be done for the humanities and social sciences. There's starting to be this thing called the digital turn, which you can argue about when it exactly happened, but it's starting to become necessary to have access to more computing power than just on your desktop. And so they're starting to have conversations about this. And they push for it and they work on it together to the point where Compute Canada sends representatives to an INC conference event, right? They send a number of people to DHSI to see what it's even about so they can begin to understand what this culture is. And so I see two important things here. One is that the groups are working together to see what's possible. And two, there's a lot of willingness from those who are in kind of this position of power in terms of access and control over the systems and the support programs and so on, to begin to meet those who are asking for help where they're at. And I had privilege to be at both of those places when those meetings took place. What does this turn into? It turns into a job posting. And this is also a point of fortunateness for me because that job posting was ultimately located at the University of Alberta where I was. Nothing to do with me or anything like that. That was a university that was looking for a position and they were willing to host a DH position. It was weird. It's the strangest job posting I think I've seen. It was really 3 job postings all in one, as 3 different organizations each wanted whoever took on this position to fulfill a role that they needed. One was from the U of A, The University of Alberta wanted to replace or start setting up a replacement for one of their lead support specialists. His name was Msao. He's still a legend in terms of number of tickets that he responded to across the country on a regular basis. Then there was Westgrid at the time, the organization from Manitoba all the way to BC that looked after a lot of regional computing needs. They were kind of looking for a system administrator. And then there was Compute Canada, who was looking for a DH specialist. So really, these were 3 jobs. It was 3 jobs in one. It was like a 300% role. I don't know who else applied for it, and I'm not ultimately sure how I ended up with it. But I'm thankful that I was. But once I received the role, it was pretty clear I could only do one thing, and I was not going to be the system administrator that half the job wanted. I could do some system, I could do some user support, but I couldn't do that. And it was really going to be to push DH and how can we grow the digital humanities and so on in Canada. So,
John, just
yes.
a quick question. What is NST?
National Service, National Support Team. So this is not, thank you very much for asking that, Pierre-Luc. We talk about the national teams in the Federation. And the same is true under the Alliance, to my understanding, or the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. I added the S because that's really what the humanities team is trying to do there. Anywhere else it's called national team, but we've got different sorts of national teams, some that are looking at things on the back end and some that are more forward facing. So I stuck the S in there to kind of remind me that this is a support team and it's meant to be working with the research community. So the slide, the question in the chat there, should the slides be changing on my screen? So the one you should be seeing right now for me is, where did the idea for HSS National Support Team come from? I'm about to change the slide. So how was the team first composed? Well, I've got an image for you here on the screen. This is the way the team felt a little bit. It's not, I don't think this is reflective of reality, but it's the way it felt to me when I first started. I was kind of this lone humanities person who had some technical skills. This is the way it kind of felt when I first came in. Everybody was very, very welcoming, very, very nice, but it was pretty clear to me when I first came in that here's this person that's come up through a humanities background, mostly through philosophy, and a lot of people that have other backgrounds that are very, very technical and doing a lot of very amazing things. Technical superheroes as far as I'm concerned, and they're still there. Question in the chat about how to get the English slides. So if somebody could reply to that, would be helpful. So I get the role, I show up in January, and then about a week later, the first thing they do is send me to a national conference in Winnipeg. So yes, I'm in Edmonton, but Winnipeg in January is a special event. So thank you very much for that. And at that event, I don't know what gripped me at that time, but I addressed all the participants who were there, all these technical experts, and I told them, you don't know what you've done, right? You don't know what you've done inviting the humanities into this group. And I'd like to say that at the time, as much as I might have thought that I had a sense of what they had done, and otherwise, why would I say that? I don't think I really did. And I wasn't sure about where we were going to go and how we could figure these things out. So, and I think this is true at the very first meeting that we had of the Humanities Social Sciences National Support Team. I don't think that Dugan, Patrick, Mohammed, Dan, Pavel, Paul, or Felix, who came along with me for that first meeting, and I look back at the agendas, and thank heavens to them for insisting that we keep these agendas on this wiki thing as opposed to some Google Docs, whatever, because there's 63 agendas there. And I got to go through and look at them and see a lot of interesting stuff. We really did a lot together. And what I discovered over time is that, well, many of them didn't have the depth of humanities background that I might have. They all had an interest in it, and they were all cared deeply about the researchers and the research that they were doing and wanted to support that. And I grew to be more technical, and I would like to think that they grew to be more humanities. And so we can't say they're more humane. They're all fine, humane people in their own right. And one representation of this, this kind of is similar foundation and just how we got to work so well together over time is that 54 meetings in, right, of this 63 meetings that are in the wiki, and that's not all the meetings we were part of, something interesting shows up on one of those agendas. And if you've seen agendas and notes from meetings before, you definitely have. Sometimes they'll list regrets, right? Like who can't come to the meeting? Well, we started doing that early on to track kind of attendance, but then the regrets started to become other things that people regretted. Like I regret eating the hot dog that I shouldn't have eaten at lunch, and so on and so forth. And on that 54th meeting, another thing shows up on the agenda in the notes for the first time: confessions. And I won't tell you what the confessions are. They're there for those of you who have access to them. We can talk about them later. But just the fact that people are confessing things in their lives, this shows the kind of close knitness that we were able to achieve on the team. We'll go to the next slide. So who do we support at the end of it, right? A little bit of this stuff at the back. And at the beginning, this was an interesting question for me. I believe it's still an interesting question today. It's like, who are we supporting? Because I showed up, I'm really excited. They're excited too. We start looking around and it wasn't clear who was really ready to go. And so it became clear that we needed kind of a three-step process that we started deploying. And the first step is inform, the second step was train, and then the third step was support. This is what we were going to start doing for originally the digital humanities. People didn't even know we were out there. Yes, we were having these conversations with these organizations and the people who are representing them. But that wasn't enough, right? There's literally thousands of academics in Canada who are researchers in these spaces, and most of them had no idea who we were. So the first thing we had to do was let them know. And then the second thing was, well, once we let them know, they don't necessarily know how to use these particular systems, so we're going to need to train them. And the last one is support them. And so the kind of the slogan that we came up with, it's represented here on the slide in the image, is come for own cloud, stay for the compute. Own Cloud at the time was a Dropbox-like service that was being offered by Simon Fraser University. And for a lot of people, this was the beginning of working with Compute Canada at the time, now the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. And Own Cloud, we're not using Own Cloud anymore. We now use a branch of it or a fork of it called Nextcloud. But the point was, not everybody needed really large computing resources, right? What they might need was access to a Dropbox-like storage system that was here in Canada that they could then push and pull files from, right? For their lab, right? Or to support other researchers or graduate students or other people that they were working with. Maybe they needed some training. How would I even use Python? Show me how to imagine what's even possible here. It's a question that nobody asked directly, but they would kind of ask indirectly that we try to help them with, right? And what became clear as we started going and moving forward is that if we focused on DH, it wasn't going to be enough, right? There wasn't going to be enough researchers that were going to be interested here. And so we started branching things out. And so this ceased to become kind of the DH team at some point, and we changed the title to HSS for Humanities and Social Sciences, right? Because we started getting requests from all sorts of places. And what really happened to us is that we became the catch-all for all the other computation that wasn't being captured by the disciplines who have been doing this for a long time, right? The chemists, they had their own place to go. The physicists, they had their own team and support for some of that. For any of these traditional computing based disciplines were looked after. And then we became the place for all the others, right? So we started fielding requests for things from RedCap, MediaWiki, Moodle, brain computer interface art, big data and Apache Spark for the humanities, the CFI cyber infrastructure grants. We got lots of consultations on those. There's lots of visualization work, and I see Alex Razumov's here today. Thank you, Alex, for that work. Early days of the Federated Research Data Repository, they're in those agendas as we start to talk and discuss those with Jason Alati at University of Saskatoon, the Old Bailey, computational law. There's a number of music projects that start coming in. So we're getting arts projects in there as well. Processing massive quantities of videos, right? I see Garth has joined us today. Thank you for some of your work there, Garth. Really interesting one that I didn't know what to do with from archaeology. Somebody came in with LiDAR cave scans and they weren't sure where else to go and they ended up with us. Gambling in BC, and some lottery information, right? And a bunch of training with software carpentry and so on, right? And that's just a few of the things that I pulled out of the agendas we looked at. So, but what's important here is this notion of being this sort of group that grabbed everything else, the stuff that didn't fit elsewhere. So we started as DH because they had a voice. And then once we had some supports in place, we really started growing that and seeing the digital that happening elsewhere that wasn't really being picked up. So we tried to address that. And this is totally a leading question. Was support from the Humanities Social Sciences National Support Team different from support provided by other teams? And the answer to this is a yes, I think it was. Although this doesn't mean that there weren't fights over it or that we were perhaps doing things that were inappropriate at the time. Well, what do I mean by that? When we first came on and it became clear that we needed this informed, trained, and then move to a more traditional support model, we had to figure out how to do that. And so there was a number of flights that I had around the country. I went to Victoria, I went to the conference, it's called, used to be called the Learneds, now it's called Congress. And if you're in the humanities, social sciences, it's likely the case that your discipline meets at the same place at the same time that all the other humanities, social sciences are meeting as well. And so I would go to those events. I went to AceNet to do kind of a meet and greet and figure out what their needs were. And this wasn't happening on most of the other teams. They were much more set in terms of the support that they were providing. And here we're trying to build and grow the audience. So that was a big change for us. Digital Humanities Summer Institute. I mentioned at the beginning, this is a place that they sent some people to find out about the culture. Once the Humanities Social Sciences National Team was up and running, we partnered with them and we were able to offer some kind of joint scholarships. We were also able to send experts from within the Compute Canada Federation to deliver courses there. And the intent there was that we would have somebody from the academic community teaching alongside somebody from the support community that the Federation represented. And we would continue to have these pairings. And so it started with a Python class that I was leading, but it moved on to a big data class, visualization, and so on and so forth. We also ran an open data challenge with the Social Sciences and Humanities Researchers Council. So provided the data set. There was a challenge for what can you do with this data set? And there were some prizes awarded with that, just to try to capture people's imaginations in terms of what was possible and to provide some training for them as well, right? So this would be to show what resources were available, and that was a big part. But a piece that was really different for us. So these are all kind of nice to have above and beyond, but the thing I think represented the most about how this team was different in terms of how it did support. And this upset a number of people, and it still does. And I'm conflicted in terms of what's the right way to do this still, is that we would often skip the support ticketing queue. Right? So what do I mean by that? Typical support ticket, you're going to send the support at alliancecan.ca now, and it'll go into a pool and it'll get assigned or somebody will pick up your ticket. Whereas when we started out, a lot of the people didn't send it to support at computecanada.ca at the time because it wasn't how things were done. They weren't sure what to ask and so on and so forth. So they were much more comfortable emailing john.simpson at computecanada.ca or insert name of other person on team and building this kind of relationship. And that was important for them because the experience for them when they jumped into the ticketing system was a little bit more cold and unfriendly than they were looking for. Doesn't mean it wasn't helpful, but they were looking for somebody that they could begin to have a knowing relationship with, right? Mentoring is the wrong word, but somebody who would kind of be there for you, felt they would understood your issue, And there was no question that the work that you were doing was valuable. You might not have big data, but it doesn't mean that your data wasn't complicated or interesting or worthy of talk. And I don't think anybody on the ticketing system ever meant to pass that feeling along. But I think it was there for people, or even if it wasn't, they were worried that it might be. So we'd skip that. And so we did a lot of skipping the ticketing system. The downside with that is that you're not logging these things in the same way. And that's really unfortunate because it becomes harder to show that support is required in certain ways going forward, or to adjust if you need to. So things were different then, and I think some of those differences still continue. I'm going to go to the next slide. I'm going to flip from this, from then the past to then the future, and next slide after that. So what are some lessons that we might take from this kind of very cursory spin through just a few questions here? Well, one is keep pushing, right? We need to keep driving forward for the support that is required for these disciplines that we're looking to support, right? And that support, next slide, needs to come from all sides, right? So it can't just be organizations that represent the researchers, and it can't just be most likely organization is the Alliance to point to, but it can't just be them. Like, the community of organizations needs to come together and say, look, there's a need here. How can we work together to fulfill it, right? We'd be in a very different space if Compute Canada back in the day had not consulted, had just kind of heard what was sort of needed, and then decided that it knew best and pushed it out there, right? It would also be in a very different situation if the organizations that were pushing Compute Canada to bring some a change in terms of the support that they were providing and who they're providing it for, had fallen on deaf ears, right? And they had just not listened. So that would be unfortunate, right? So we would communicate with people and communicate them as best we can, and we need to work together to do that. I don't know quite who those organizations are today, but certainly I think the Alliance is one of them. Citizen is still alive and well. Inc. and DHSI are still there. And even though things have changed, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a few slides about how they've changed, I think there's still space, and I hope there's still space, and to work together to continue to move this forward, because I think there's more potential here. Key thing that really happened that came out of this is dedicated supports, right? And so on that first slide, I represented myself as this kind of O amongst a bunch of X's. Dedicated support is still key. I think this is important, and I say this knowing all the work and effort that's being put in by the people that are putting these this even just this workshop series together, let alone behind the scenes. And I want you to know that I think that those positions, some of them, at least one of them, needs to be 100% or 95% focused on managing and looking after the team. And this is a tough ask. I recognize that, given how the funding comes in. Some of it comes through the Alliance now, some of it comes from your institution. Different institutions, different managers within those institutions have different ideas about what a 60-40 split is meant to look like in terms of time. Are you a national support person who just happens to be placed at that institution, or are you a local person who happens to be called in to do national support? And if it's either of those things, is it a 60-40 split? Who's tracking that? What does that really mean? Where's the value to whatever organization's putting this money in? These are a lot of tough questions. But I think it needs to happen. And if it's not happening right now, or it stops happening in the future, a conversation needs to be had. Because if you, particularly given what I'm going to suggest in a few slides hence, the size of the community that needs to be supported here and the diversity of it needs somebody who's saying, I'm going to do my best to support them. So dedicated supports, this person can't do it alone. They're all welcome, right? And this is the truth of what was really on that first slide. It's not an O and a bunch of X's. It's just a bunch of people with different skills. Some of them have a different role, perhaps. And my role at the time was dedicated, or what I made my role to be, because I just didn't do the other things that are on that job description. What I made my role to be was be that as much as I could, 100% humanities, social sciences anchor. What can we do? How can we bring the people together with all the myriad of skills that they have and the perspectives that they have and the roles that they have at their institutions and their other interests, and bring them together so that we can build things together, right? Great example. Had nothing to do with anything that I had. This is the brainchild of others, is the series that I'm speaking at right now, right? There's other examples of that as well. So can't do it alone. You need a dedicated support, and they've got to have a lot of people around them, and they have to be really welcoming and build that out. And why is this? Well, next slide. Because of the size of the tent. And this is a bit of a, this is not a bit, this is totally a reference to a discussion that took place in the digital humanities community a while ago. I've been a little on the outside, maybe it's still going on, I'm not certain. But this is a debate in the digital humanities. Like, what is the digital humanities? Who is in, who is out, who's part of the group? Because we need to think big tent, but we have to think bigger. There's a role that this team has, or it had in the past. I believe it still has it, and that is gathering together the other, gathering together the groups that aren't clearly represented in those other spaces, right? So where are the arts, right? If I look at the name humanities, social sciences, and I'm an artist, right? I belong to a faculty, I belong to, a fine arts department. Am I represented there? How do I know that? Right? I might have heard about it and so on, but it's not so clear that it's the case. Medicine, we got calls from people in medicine. My wife's in medicine. I've done presentations with her on this sort of thing, and it's not clear that this is where else she would go, right? Architecture was another one that we worked with people on. Business is another one. It's not clear in everybody's mind that that falls in the social sciences category. What should the disciplines be? And this matters for a very particular reason. It matters, I think, because there's strength in numbers, right? What do I mean by that? Well, if I have one researcher and that researcher comes in and they say they have 1,000 core years or 10,000 core years, and that's their need. And I have one other researcher over here, and they want to use OwnCloud, starts to become the case that, well, that number's bigger. Like, I don't know what a core year equivalent is, or might not. But this person just wants to use this Dropbox thing. Well, maybe I should put all my effort on the core years. But you can change that equation, right? And you can change that equation by changing the number of people on the other side that are interested in that thing. Well, all of a sudden, it's 10 people that are interested in OwnCloud, or it's 100 people that are interested in OwnCloud. It's 1,000 people that are interested in using OwnCloud. All of a sudden, it matters. And it matters not just for those people, because odds are the person who has 10,000 core years is going to need it as well, right? This is a digital parallel to why we should make sure that our buildings are accessible, right? It's good for all of us. And you can make that argument, but it's easier to make that argument when you have the numbers, right? And so by making that tent much larger, you're going to begin to have the numbers to support the services that are required in that other space. It also maximizes intersectionality, right? So my analogy here is you can have salt and water, right? That's a very different thing from salt water, right? For any chemists that are here today, right? The way it behaves, what it does, it's not the same as just having some salt and having some water beside it. When you combine them, when you fuse them together, this is the difference between conjunction and fusion, to draw on my logic background. It's not the same thing. Something new happens when they're combined in this way, and you create that possibility by expanding that tent. And I think we've seen that particularly because we've got the combination of support experts with this wide variety of skills, working with people that they might not have been paired up with if we had sliced up these disciplines a little bit more directly. And I've always been thankful for seeing the work and the volunteering and the courage. There's some courage there to put your hand up and say, I'm going to go help this expert, even though I'm just a technical expert, right? Well, the researcher often feels the same way, right? They're putting up their hand and saying, I'm going to ask for help. I'm supposed to be an expert in this field, but I don't know how to do this thing. I'm going to ask for help. And I think if we always remember that both sides are usually coming from that position of a little bit of fear and trepidation, we'll do a lot better. In the big tent, we need the biggest tent, and it's apparently the biggest tent in the world, so it's worth looking up. Next slide. I don't want it to seem that everything was super great in the past and it's still super great now, and things changed. Right? When we first started the Humanities Social Sciences National Support Team, we had something that we no longer have. And if this has changed, somebody, Megan, Lydia, you can stop me right now and I will skip this slide, but I don't believe this is the case. And I've advocated for this for a long time, but I've never had the privilege to advocate for it in a keynote. So I'm going to advocate for it now. When we started, we had a budget. That's something that the other teams didn't have. It's another difference in terms of what we're able to do, why we're able to move around the country, be able to offer some of these scholarship programs, to fly people to Digital Humanities Summer Institute to deliver courses, to start informing and providing training and building out competence and capacity in Canada. And it made a huge difference. And slowly over time, it got less and less and less, because it wasn't really understood. And when people looked at it, it was easy to cut. There's a practice called bike shedding. You can imagine a bunch of people coming together to look at plans for a nuclear power plant. Well, nuclear power plants are really complicated, and so maybe they don't really want to they're uncomfortable getting into that too much, and it might, it's challenging to do that, but there's this bike shed off to the side. And so there's lots of comments on the bike shed, and maybe if we need to cut costs, figuring out how to do it with a nuclear power plant, principle isn't what we do. What we do is we get rid of the bike shed. And it really felt that that's what was happening over a few years with the Humanities Social Sciences National Support Team. We started with a budget. I remember it was about $5,000 or $7,000. That allowed us to fly people all over the place. And we were able to get lots of leverage from that too, because if we flew people to Digital Humanities Summer Institute, well, they would put them up for free. So we didn't have to pay for their accommodations. And then they could deliver training. And they delivered training to dozens and dozens of people over the course of the week. It was a pretty powerful event. And then as the budget got less and less, we couldn't do that anymore. And now I think we might just run one workshop at the Summer Institute now, or maybe they're done digitally. Anyways, I think this is crucial. If you really care about delivering support, I think the teams require a small budget, and that budget could be the order of $5,000 to $10,000. And I don't think this is just required, and this is me stepping outside of just the humanities social sciences. I think you could offer this to most of the teams. And there's lots of ways that you could do it. It'd be very fiscally responsible, and it would have a lot of impact, right? All of a sudden, the people who are deploying support are at the conferences, meeting the people that they're supporting. And it's not just a ticketing system anymore. The names matter, the relationships matter. Speaking of relationships, yeah, the relationships really do matter. And this is something I hope the team continues and has been continuing. It has, as far as I know. So we need to meet the researchers. And I mean this in two ways. We need to meet them face to face, right? That's important. It's important to breathe the same air, break the same bread every so often. It allows for trust to be built. And it's through trust that you're able to, try new things and work together and achieve them. And it's also important to meet them where they are at in terms of their skills. So don't expect them to suddenly become the technical expert that you are. meet them where they're at, right? Wherever that may be in terms of their skills, and also try to meet them in their location, right? Like, sure, it's one thing to meet face to face, but it's another to see somebody in their office space, to see them in their lab, to walk with them and talk with the graduate students or the undergraduate students or whoever it is that they're working with. You'll understand a lot more. And all of a sudden that ticket, this like, how could this person possibly have done this? Becomes I get this. This is because of how the funding flows, or this is because they had to ask these people to help them because nobody else would do it. And they're just doing the best they can, right? There's a lot of understanding that's gathered there. And I want to push for something else here that I was never able to get traction for back in the day. And this is for more proactive support. We could do this on a small scale. What do I mean by that? I mean, proactive support in terms of checking in with somebody. Once you start to have a relationship with that researcher, send them an email in 6 months and say, how's that project that I helped you with last September work out, right? Is there any help I can still provide, right? Let them know that you're still there. It wasn't just kind of one and done. There's a relationship here. Research happens over time and it happens with many people and it's very iterative. Be part of that iterative process. Check in, follow up. And I've always been advocating for help doing this in the forms of something like a customer resource management program or whatever, but I could never find one that quite got it right for us. And maybe there isn't one. Maybe that's a DH project, so we can go build a tool for that. But really what matters here is the concept. You want to be in there all the time, checking in with people, like the same way you used to work your Rolodex or your folder full of business cards. Check back in with them, make sure they're all right. They'll appreciate it, right? And we'll have a stronger level of support. Last thing I want to say before I open up for questions is that I think it's really crucial, like in terms of who do we reach out to and support? Yes, I think there should be some broad disciplines here and like not be like carving up to finally who we're helping. Come, this is the team that can help anyone, right? A very human team, a team that's good at explaining things to people from other places being those disciplines or practices or technical pieces, because we're practiced at doing it with different people. And so we can come to be humble in our place of knowing. Anyways, but of those groups, when you reach out to them, I think it's really important to target graduate students. Why? I think because the technology, the methods, techniques, I think they're moving really fast. And undergraduates still kind of sorting stuff out. Doesn't mean that they shouldn't be getting skills and so on and so forth, but imagining kind of what the resources are, they're probably not a core group. Early career academics are really focused on kind of nailing that early career, on getting those monographs out and so on and so forth. They're kind of already being set in their ways. It's really hard to move them. Midterm, late term academics, I'm looking at you as a 48-year-old, soon to be 48-year-old, right? It's hard to change your practices and learn new things. Doesn't mean you can't, but if you can, you're probably more the exception than the rule. Graduate students are where it's likely at. They're the best place to kind of create this fusion, right? For the discipline knowledge and the technical skills that they want to bring together to make this fusion, to make this salt water, as opposed to, well, here's somebody who does research and knows this deeply, and they also have some technical skills, but they don't see how to stick them together. It's the graduate students that I think you're most likely to create that fusion in. And just one short story about a failed opportunity where I almost pulled this off, and then we'll turn it over to questions. Before COVID, remember that? Back before COVID? Well, before COVID, I had met with the chair of the University of Alberta Sociology Department. She's a friend of mine, been a colleague for a long time, done a lot of projects through community service learning with her. Name's Sarah Doro. So I met with the chair of the sociology department, and we were looking, I was looking, we the research computing group at the University of Alberta, we believed that graduate students were really important. We wanted to find a discipline that was open and willing and where it kind of made sense to work with them very closely so that this vision could be achieved. Well, what's the vision? Well, the vision was roughly that in 5 years from when we started a program with them, every graduate student that left the department would be able to handle big data and be able to handle it on a supercomputer or a high performance computing cluster or whatever to do it, right? And because of the relationship I had with the chair of the sociology department, they were willing to have that conversation. We went in, we talked to the department a few times, and we had started to build up what that program would look like. And we were kind of getting ready to deploy it, right? Then COVID happened. So everybody left. And so all this got thrown into turmoil. She was no longer the chair shortly after that. So there was a new chair, and I didn't reach out to establish that relationship. And I ended up with a new job. Things changed with Compute Canada, and I moved on, and I'm now still with the University of Alberta, but I'm on an interchange with ISDE. So things changed there. But we were really close to this. And I think this vision possible. If we could identify a few departments at a few universities with the right supports to do it as a trial, 5 years time, you don't have a graduate student who leaves who can't do this work, because this is the work that's catching attention. Doesn't mean that close reading, doesn't mean that whatever other practices in your discipline aren't important, but when you can fuse them with the power that technological advances are providing, right? Whether it's just using big data to crunch, or computers to crunch bigger data and more numbers so you can do more, or seeing things you couldn't see because the AI is detecting patterns that weren't obvious to you. There's something there. We don't know what it is, but we need to put pressure and focus on it to create that fusion. And I think graduate students are the place to do it. So with that said, that's me talking long enough. Thank you very much for your time. I'm really interested to know, to return to now, right? So we looked at then the past, then the future. But now, what questions do you have? What thoughts do you have? What do you think about when you think about support in the biggest tent you can have to catch the others that started with humanities, social sciences?